Buongiorno, siamo qua per la conferenza stampa del documentario Becoming Led Zeppelin e vi presento seduti al tavolo a partire da destra in fondo la sceneggiatrice Allison McGourty, il regista Bernard MacMahon e Jimmy Page. I'm going to start to a question, very simple to Robert, just to contextualize. Why Led Zeppelin?
I thought was the next most important period in music, culturally and technologically, and Led Zeppelin in 1969 were the part in the center of that hurricane. And I'd loved the story since I was a childhood and the records, and it just felt like the most exciting story to tell. It reminded me of all the legendary stories I'd read, like the Labours of Hercules and the Odyssey.
Can you talk a little bit about the way you approached the band and to get them to allow you to make this documentary?
Well, I wanted to know the film would work, and so Allison and I scripted the film, and we researched and studied the story of the group. We were big fans of the group already, and maybe Allison, you can continue here. We made a storyboard.
Yeah, Bernard did a lot of history of the group. Bernard did a lot of research into the history of the group, and we scripted it. And then Bernard and our editor, Dan Gitlin, made a beautiful storyboard of the whole story from start to finish of the movie as we envisaged it, and created a beautiful leather-bound book, which we then presented to Jimmy and talked him through it. And miraculously, to this day, what you see on the screen in the movie is exactly what we presented to him when we first met.
So yeah, Jimmy, we met, didn't we, in the winter of 2017, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
That's it, okay.
Yes.
Yes, we certainly did meet then. And well, we've heard about the storyboard, and I guess the two, when we first met, we were probably a little nervous of each other, but the conduit was the storyboard. And certainly for me, because it was so accurate and the research had obviously been so deep, that I could see all these milestones appearing as we turned the storyboard through. And I thought, well, they've really got it. They really understand what it was about. And yeah, I just couldn't wait to see whether it was all going to happen, and when it did, and it was a wonderful experience to do. And as I say, yeah, it's absolutely true and faithful to the storyboard as you see it on the screen.
You have had a previous request of making films about the band, right?
Well, they sort of had been, but they were pretty miserable. Yes, miserable, and also to the point where they would want to be, they'd want to be concentrating on anything but the music. And the thing is, so consequently, I would immediately sort of recoil from that sort of thing. But with this one, it's everything about the music and what made the music tick, and the performances, and complete versions of songs. That's the other thing. It's not just a sample of it and then a talking head. This is something in a totally different genre.
And for Bob and Allison, why did you think it's a counterintuitive approach to documentary, a script, a storyboard? I mean, the cliche of documentary is that there's an immediacy to it, and you really mapped it.
Yes, it is an unusual way of making a documentary, but it's more like a feature film way of making documentaries, and that's probably what we'd like to do next after this would be a feature. But so we after the research, we wrote it, and Bernard, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at it, and I talked to with Jimmy, we looked at it like a musical.
Yeah.
Like the story was a musical, and there was dialogue in between the music, but you could take the journey musically. And the idea was to try for you to understand and feel what Led Zeppelin's music is and the influences it had and where it came from. So you could hopefully see when they appear why the group made the impact it did, because...
Yeah. Do you mind if I carry on with that? Yeah. Well, the thing is, of course, it's 4 members that are musicians, but it's this sort of thing that the stars literally aligned for these 4 people to come together. So as you hear the story, you can see that they all had different sort of careers, if you like, and different ways of approaching things. But once it comes together like that, there's like this explosion that doesn't stop, and the momentum of that explosion is carried on through touring, and it's carried on through recording. And the fact that the first album comes out in 1969, but so does, in 1970, in January 1970, but so does the second album come out in 1970. So with all the touring between America and England and recording and doing all these various sort of bits of footage here and there, the momentum of it was absolutely, I was going at like 1,000,000 miles an hour, but that's what they've managed to capture, and I'm sure you will agree when you see it.
There's a question there.
Hi, Stephen Shaver here for the Boston Herald. I'd like to ask Jimmy Page, when you said there were all of these miserable attempts approaching you before, can you talk about the independence that you've had with Led Zeppelin? It's noted that when you went, the album was done by you. You produced it. You could call the shots with the record companies. You never had to be sort of bargaining. And in terms of the legacy of Led Zeppelin, can you talk about what you've been most concerned with and how you see Led Zeppelin's place in music history today? Thank you.
Right. Okay. No. Okay. So the very first part of this was that I was in a band called the Yardbirds that was really known on the underground scene and the underground venues in America. By this time, there had been 5 members of the Yardbirds, and Jeff Beck and I had been in the band as the 2 guitarists, but then Jeff went on to do a solo career, and so that left me with putting my ideas into the band. Basically, then that band split up. However, during the sort of, the Boston Tea Party was one of the gigs that we used to do, and the Image Club in Miami. Let's see, there's many. I'm not going to try and list them all because you've got other questions you want to ask. But basically, when the band folded, the 4-member band folded, I had a choice of what to do next, and the thing that I wanted to do next was form a group. I knew exactly what was going on with underground radio in America, that they played stereo records, and they were starting to play full sides of records as opposed to just 3-minute singles. It was 2 different markets altogether. So there was an underground radio, there was underground concerts, but in England nobody knew what we were doing, but we were really quite a cult band. So here comes the second part of the story then, is are you going to go to a record company and say, well, I was in a band called the Yardbirds, it's now split. Were you on any of the hit records? No, I wasn't on any of the hit records, but we've got a really big following in America. It's a guitar-based band. The best way to do that was not sort of say, can we have an advance to make an album? The way to do it was to actually make the album and then present it. So as far as Led Zeppelin today, I think the whole of the work of Led Zeppelin is an incredible textbook for musicians. That's what I do believe, and I'm really happy that it is so. And so I'm a self-taught musician as well. It's not something that I learnt in an academy. And I would like to encourage all musicians, whether they do go to academy, classically trained or whatever, or self-taught, because to play an instrument is such a wonderful thing, to have a connection with an instrument.
Yes.
Thank you.
Question.
And that was one of the things that tempted us to do the film, was the fact that this is a life lesson in the way they work, and that anybody, so long as you work hard at your craft and persevere, your dreams can come true. And we do like to have a higher purpose in the films that we make, and we felt that this was a very inspirational story for young people, young men and women and children all over the world, that they can work hard at whatever they want to accomplish, and their dreams will come true.
Hi, my name is Louis-Philippe Ouimet. I'm from Radio-Canada in Montreal, Quebec. I have spent hours practicing your lick, Mr. Page, so it's an honor. I know the Led Zeppelin story by heart, the lick by heart, but what do we really learn in this new documentary?
Have you had a chance to see the documentary yet?
Tonight.
Well, everything will be answered. I promise you, because somebody who's really understood what these riffs are about and how this music gels together, you're just going to have a wonderful time. I think that's the easiest way to describe it, because you already understand quite a lot of what it is, and now you're going to see what it was. Thanks.
Hi, this is Matic Majcen from RTV Slovenia. A question for Mr. Page. In the film, we hear a couple of very interesting anecdotes about how you try to bypass the logic of the music industry that pushed you to release singles when you always considered that Led Zeppelin were an albums band. Since then, obviously, the industry has changed a lot, and with online streaming, there is possibly even a greater push to release hit singles. So I'd like to hear your opinion about the issue. Are you optimistic that the form of the album is something that will stay with us in the longer term? Thank you.
Well, the thing about albums and the groups that were involved in that sort of pre-Led Zeppelin and post-Led Zeppelin is that people considered albums to be like a body of work. It was a summing up of where you were at that point of time or that year, because everything else surrounding it would be doing concerts. So that would be a sort of statement of where you are. I knew in America that there was this underground radio that weren't playing singles. So the way that I was thinking about it, say for example the Rolling Stones would always be putting out singles with albums, and the singles were a very important market. But the problem being that if you want to be doing these sort of albums that have, where each song leads into another, you know, the whole thing is really crafted in that way. You don't want to be bogged down, say after the second album with Whole Lot of Love on it, you don't want somebody saying to you on the third album, well, where's the Whole Lot of Love? You see, I didn't want to get caught up with a ball and chain of like having to present the single. The thing to do was to present an album which was really, really quality. I hope that answers the question.
It was an interesting coincidence when we filmed the band, was the exact same week, that 50 years to the day that they met.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
In the house.
Exactly,
Yeah.
50 years,
Yeah.
the planets aligned, yes, when when Jimmy, Robert and John Paul Jones came to the shoot.
A question, you want to put your headphones on, because I think she's asking in Italian.
Buongiorno, sono Angela Calvini di Avvenire. Una domanda per il maestro Page, perché lei in questo film dimostra insomma quanto già a 20 anni eravate dei maestri. Oggi per un ragazzo di 20 anni probabilmente è molto più complesso in questa industria molto liquida, dominata dal web, molto mordi e fuggi, riuscire ad avere, come dire, una carriera probabilmente come la vostra. Quindi lei come vede l'industria di adesso e che cosa appunto consiglierebbe ai ragazzi di oggi? E seconda cosa, nel film voi apparite saggi, dopo aver passato una gioventù molto rock, a che punto siete delle vostre vite oggi tutti e 4 componenti della band? Grazie.
Okay, all right. I'm going to answer the first part of the question first, and maybe I might ask you to rephrase the second part. As far as young musicians go, and as I said earlier on, I was self-taught, and it was almost like a pilgrimage to find new information. It wasn't like there were no computers, so you couldn't go online and sort of work out how to play, I don't know, Dark Side of the Moon or any sort of song that you want. By this, you had to learn from records, and it was a very deliberate OCD process to do that. And all of the guitarists from the 60s, they all did the same thing. That's the way that they learned. What I would say to young guitarists, well, of course, now there's just a lexicon of information out there. And I know people who learn from online. You may find one song, and you may find that actually there are about a number of different versions, and actually none of them sound like the one you want to hear off the record. But there are ways of approaching it. I would say to young musicians, just to put the work in, to keep putting the work into something that you love, because the connection with the instrument is something which is so rewarding, and it's something that can be something that you, like me, it could be a hobby that I managed to turn into a career, which then again makes people happy, which is absolutely terrific. Or it could be somebody, who's a university student who's doing all this, intense learning and getting ready for their exams, but it's nice to have an instrument just to be able to play and go into that world. So it's therapeutic, and it's just a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I would encourage musicians in those two areas that I've just described there.
Yeah, it's a film about apprenticeship in many ways. It's about how you learn your craft if you're wanting to do something, ambitious, and how you go about that process. And so it's really it's half a musical, it's half a how-to guide about if you've got a really ambitious dream, how you might go about it. And so you're just having these.
The question about the internet, though, is I met a group at one of these academies, musical academies in Brighton, in England, and they'd won that year's best group of. So there was the singers, musicians, and I said, "What are you doing now?" And they said, "Well, we're going to Vietnam." And I said, "Well, that's really interesting. How did you get that?" They said, "Well, actually, we've had a hit in Southeast Asia already, because somebody picked our music up off of the streaming, and they put it to an advert, and this is the second time that we're going to Southeast Asia." And I thought, well, wow, it really can work, but you have to be really lucky for that to happen, hey? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that wasn't done by a record company, that was done by themselves.
Hi, I have a question for Jimmy Page. It's wonderful. I was one of those young girls who ogled at Robert Plant when I was young. But I love your outfits too, where did they come from? The dandy was wonderful. Who designed them? And secondly, Charlie Watts recently passed, but the Stones aren't giving up like you guys did when John Bonham died. And John Bonham is just wonderful. That it's as if he's alive in this movie. It's one reason that you might wanted to have stopped there, wanted to have stopped at that period, although he lived a lot longer, of course. So could you discuss the John Bonham thing versus Charlie Watts and the Stones, and then your outfits, please?
Well, it's a totally different concept of the bands. And I love the Stones, I've got to tell you that. And I loved Charlie's playing, and the way that he locked in with Bill Wyman and Keith is just something else, the way that they could group. But the difference with Led Zeppelin and many of the other bands that were, most of the other bands, was that Led Zeppelin would go on the stage and it would be improvising all the way through the set. So if you can imagine, from 1968, when we start, all the way through to the point where we lose John Bonham, there have been a lot of concerts with a lot of improvising, and riffs that'll just come out on the night and just disappear into the ether. But we had that ESP about us. Now, the thing is that when we lost John, it was inconceivable to be able to get somebody and, well, what were you going to do? Teach them the improvising? No. So for us, it was a very easy decision.
And your outfits?
My outfits, yeah, I did design those, and it was as my confidence grew and my character grew, then also I was reflecting that in the clothes that I was wearing on stage, but also off stage. So, yeah, it was things that were actually made or things that I managed to find in second-hand shops or whatever.
Bernard, how hard it was to find a tape with his voice?
Sorry?
How hard it was to find it, yeah.
Very, very hard. When we started, most people haven't heard John Bonham speak. And I tracked down 2 or 3 bootlegs of like interviews done by journalists, but they were like in a pub, you know, with drinks clashing and waiters coming up. And I thought, we can't use this. And then I came across this bootleg, and it was like a short interview with John talking, and it wasn't very good. It was on an old vinyl record, but I could hear this had been made to a 1/4-inch tape. And the journalist was Australian, and I went to every Australian journalist that we knew from that era saying, do you recognize this voice? Because the journalist didn't identify himself. And eventually, I tracked down someone that said, we know who he was, but he died. Unfortunately, the Sound Archive in Canberra in Australia had put on an American epic festival, our previous film. So I called the head of it and I said, do you have an archive of radio tapes? And he went, yeah. He looked through, didn't have it, but they had about 30,000 unmarked reels. And he went through all of them, and he eventually found one with Slade written on the box, the group. Opened it up, put on it, and it was John. And that's the interview here.
How long did that take for him to find it?
Took a year.
Yeah, what I think one of the strengths of the film is this sort of archaeological dimension it had, you know, the strength of detail and the way it waves into together.
Absolutely, they were so thorough with their research. But the thing about John is that he's living it at the time. He's still alive, obviously, with this, and he's discussing various topics, you know, just really, really enthusiastic, and you feel the love in that band.
We were trying to make it feel like you're there, you know, and so it was like only having the group telling you the story because they've never done it, you know, so it's in their own words. But, you know, we'd spoken, Jimmy had opened up his diary and given us the numbers of his childhood friends, and the other band members had. So we went to all those places researching it and meeting all the people and hearing the stories. And so we could understand when Jimmy was talking what he was referring to, if he made a little reference to something, but yeah.
Yeah, and Robert said to us early on as well, he said, I don't know how you're going to be able to tell this story because Peter Grant didn't allow people to film the concerts, and we didn't do any media interviews. So what are you going to do? How are you going to tell this? And so it was a huge archaeological dig, and thanks to some fans and bootleggers, we managed to find little bits of concerts over the period. And Bernard had this, came up with this incredible technique that we call a sort of Fantasia technique, inspired by Singing in the Rain, and with a lot of layering, so you can to kind of recreate the feeling of the concerts of being there
on the road with them.
And being on the road with
them. The other thing we did as well is that where there were clips that had been seen before, we would go to the companies that filmed them, and then we would go into their basements and search through all the reels, and in almost every case we found other camera reels shot from that thing that hadn't been seen. So all the clips are recut. So if there's a performance you've seen, there are all different camera angles in that performance. And all the sound is from the original source. So the first generation original source, all the film is like original print or negative, or if it was recorded to tape, it's the original tape.
I think we have a question there.
Hello, Messo Mazzetto. I have a question for the director and one for Jimmy Page. For the director, what's your favorite Led Zeppelin song and why? And for Jimmy Page, your music are used in many movies like School of Rock, Thor. There is one in particular that you like, between the music and the images, the two.
Okay, who's first? You first?
All right. It's hard to say. I probably have, on this film, I have, my favorite is probably Good Times, Bad Times, because when it starts, that's the point that you know you're hearing something you haven't heard before. You know, the way that the band is kind of playing together. And then I'm also fallen in love with Whole Lot of Love because we were able to illustrate that song for almost 6 minutes on screen with unseen footage. But yeah, I mean, as Jimmy says, I see them as albums rather than songs. They're complete things.
Well, with Good Times, Bad Times, it's the first track on the first album. So that was the one you expected people buy. That's what they're going to put on. And the thing is, it's virtually unplayable. You won't find another drummer who can actually play that drum pattern for any length of time. And John Bonham could do it for like half an hour. So they just hit with a riff and the vocals and the guitar solos and the overall thing. That would be it. It's a wonderful sort of opening, a portal to that first album. Where music has been used of Led Zeppelin in films, where for example, they've used something like When the Levee Breaks. I mean, to hear it in the cinema, you know, it's just so awesome. And it always works whenever it's been used. So yeah, I've always enjoyed hearing that.
Hi, Amir Kamine, Not Israel. Congratulations for your film. I was waiting 2 hours, very patient, waiting, enjoy of course, waiting for the song of my youth in the 70s, and it didn't arrive, Stairway to Heaven. So, Jimmy, how the song was born, and can you explain why it became such a cult and a success?
All right, well, it was a number of sections that I'd written on guitar that I sort of basically assembled. And then I rehearsed it with John Paul Jones and John Bonham at a place called Headley Grange, that's a whole story unto itself. But it was an old country house, and we had a recording studio, a mobile one. So basically, I'm laying this thing out, and we're getting, you know, to get everybody to remember what sections are coming next. And Robert had been sitting down, and he was writing in his book, and then by about the third, fourth run through, he comes up and starts singing 90% of the lyrics. So you know Stairway to Heaven, you understand the lyrics for that, and I'm saying that this was such an inspired time in this place called Headley Grange, and that's such a good example of it. And the whole idea of that song was to have something which was anthemic, and something that had a slow reveal and just kept building and building and actually increased in the tempo. That was something that, again, hadn't really been done. Yeah, it had been done in classical music, but not necessarily in rock and roll.
I'm really sorry, but they have a red carpet, and they need to go, so I apologize. We need to finish this off here.
Thank you.
Great.